All right, guys, it is Mr. Woodward here with you, and we're going to go over some of the basics of using Google Sheets and how to produce a chart for all of the data that you collected in your Forces in Motion lab. So first things first, please name your sheet something to where you and your teachers are going to know what it is. Okay, you can see I named mine Motion and Force Woodward Example. You can name yours whatever you want, but make sure that you know what it is and make sure that your teachers know what it is. Now, the second thing, I have already put my data in, and you'll notice that I have labels for my data, and I also have units, and I put those units in parentheses. One other thing I want to point out to you, the unit for acceleration is meters per second squared. And another way to write that, and the way that I'm going to write it for this particular chart, is meters per second per second. So remember, acceleration is a rate of change of velocity. So that meters per second is your measurement for velocity. And then meters per second is the rate of change of that velocity. So here is everything that you should have collected from data table A. I'm going to click down my left mouse button. I'm going to select everything. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say, I'd like to insert a chart. And here is the chart that it gave me. Now, for some of you, it might not give you a scatter chart. Like maybe it'll give you a bar graph or something else. If it doesn't default to a scatter chart, please make sure you select that. Okay? Now, the other thing that it didn't do is it didn't collect all of my data. And that's because I have this gap here at A4 and B4. I have a reason for that gap, and we'll explore it in just a second. But the easiest thing to do right now is to come over here to my data range, and you'll see it says A1:B3. And that says, hey, I'm taking all of the data in between A1 and B3. So I'm going to click this, and there are two things I could do. I could type something new in here to tell me what I want the range to be, or I can come over here to my data and just reselect everything. And you can see when I select that, it changes the data range to A1 to B6. And that is what I want. I'm going to say, okay. Awesome. Here is my graph with these data points. And I should point out really quickly, your graph, well, and I guess I should say your data is not going to look like this, okay? So please don't look at my data and think, oh no, the data I made is wrong because it doesn't match up to Mr. Woodward's. Nope, your data is fine. I am using a different data set, okay? So data itself can be important, but what's really important is the trends that our data shows. What are the patterns that we see? That's really important in science and just in life as well. So we want to set up a trend line. So I'm going to come over here to customize. And I'm going to customize, well, I guess first, let's make sure that our chart and our axes are labeled correctly. So my chart title, acceleration versus mass, that could work. You can leave it like that if you want. I'm going to change it to data table A. As long as you know what it's for, that should be fine. And then our horizontal axis is mass, perfect. Our vertical axis is acceleration. That's exactly what we want. Now I'm going to come down here to the series. So that's my series of data. And you can see I could change the color of it. I could change the shape of it. If I didn't want it to be a circle, I can make it a triangle. And maybe I want those triangles to be bigger. And maybe I want them to be, I don't know, purple. Okay. So you can edit stuff there. The important thing that I want you to do is I want you to come here and select a trend line. And you might notice, hey, that trend line doesn't really line up with our data very much. And I totally agree with you. It's because Google Sheets will default to a linear trend line. We don't want a linear trend line. We can see that our data isn't in a straight line. So what I want you guys to select is a power series. And you'll notice when I select power series for my trend line, now all of a sudden, that trend line lines up with my data a lot better. The other thing I want you to do is I want you to label your trend line. So I click on label, and I'm going to use the equation. And you'll see that my equation is 411x raised to the power of negative 1.01. Boy, that is confusing. Remember, it's going to be, anytime we're trying to describe a line, it's going to be y equals. And we have that 411, and then x to the negative 1, that actually just means x should be in the denominator. So it's divided by x. That's a different way to look at that trend line, and that might help you see some things a little bit better. Okay. And again, yours isn't going to be 411. Yours should be pretty close to a different number. Now, one other thing that I want to help you with is within your lab, it asks you, hey, what if you had a mass of 150 kilograms? What would the acceleration be for that? Now, your data is going to be different than my data, so please don't freak out. For my data, I'm looking and I'm saying, hey, 150 kilograms is about halfway between 100 and 200. So maybe this next data point should be halfway between 3.89 and 1.87. And I'm going to round that to halfway between 4 and 2. So I'm going to try 3. And you see magically this new data point shows up. I'm going to do a couple things to this data point. I'm going to double click once, and that brings up the entire series. And I'm going to double click again to say, no, just this point, I want to change it to some different color, okay? And I want to really make it stick out, so maybe I'm going to select red. Now you can see my red data point, this one I'm trying to figure it out, it's not exactly on my trend line yet. I need to make it, what do you think? Do I need to make my acceleration bigger or smaller? I would agree, I need to make it smaller. So let's try 2.5. We're getting a little closer now. Is that good enough, or should we go a little bit bigger or a little smaller? I agree. Let's go just a little bit bigger. Let's call it like 2.67. That might even be a little high, and so maybe we call it 2.6. And you can see that sits on my trend line really well. So my answer for that question, a mass of 150 kilograms would have an acceleration of 2.6 meters per second squared. Obviously, your answer is going to be different because you have different data. So that is how you make the chart for data table A, and how you add in a new point and how you change the color of that new point. I'm going to expect you to do data table B all on your own. Now, the one hint I will give you, when you make a trend line in data table B, it will be linear. So select linear for your trend line. And if you need any other help, please ask me or ask your classroom teacher. And as always, good luck.